The encrypted connection bridged continents at 3:47 a.m., its signal crackling through the marble halls of Mar-a-Lago. Alone in his private study, the weight of America's unspoken crisis pressed against Donald Trump's chest like a stone. Outside, the Florida darkness was broken only by swaying palm trees. But inside, the former president's hands trembled as he dialed a number that would have shocked the world, a number reaching toward a young leader in Burkina Faso who had become Africa's most defiant voice. This was not a call between equals. This was strength being sought by desperation. The irony was not lost on him. The man who had once dismissed African nations was now turning to them for salvation. In the presidential compound in Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traoré was reviewing intelligence reports when his secure phone buzzed. The caller ID showed only encrypted digits, but his security chief whispered urgently in his ear, "Mon Capitaine, it's the Americans." It's him. The night air was thick with the scent of shea trees and distant cooking fires from the neighborhoods beyond the walls. Traoré set down his pen, his military uniform crisp despite the late hour. He had been expecting this call for weeks, ever since his intelligence network had picked up whispers of America's internal fracturing. The young leader's eyes reflected the dim light of his office lamp as he nodded slowly. "Mr. Trump," Traoré's voice was steady, carrying the authority of someone who had faced down coups and foreign interference. The connection was crystal clear, each word traveling across continents with stark clarity. Trump's breathing was audible, heavy with the burden of what he was about to ask. "Captain, I need to speak with you. Not as politicians, not for the cameras. As leaders facing something bigger than ourselves." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of history and the reversal of power dynamics. In that pause, both men understood that this conversation would reshape how the world viewed strength and vulnerability. The minutes ticked by as Trump outlined a crisis that could not be solved by American military might or economic sanctions. His voice cracked as he spoke of internal divisions threatening to tear his nation apart, of foreign influences he could not publicly acknowledge, of a need for African wisdom and solidarity. Traoré listened without interruption, his fingers drumming softly against his wooden desk carved from local mahogany. Outside his window, Ouagadougou was quiet, except for the distant sound of night prayers from a nearby mosque. When Trump finished speaking, the silence was profound, charged with the recognition that power had shifted in ways neither man had anticipated. "I will consider your words carefully," Traoré finally responded, his tone revealing nothing of the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. Slowly, Captain Traoré placed the encrypted phone on his mahogany desk, the weight of Trump's words still echoing in the humid night air. The presidential compound's walls seemed to pulse with the gravity of what had just transpired. America's most powerful figure had just pleaded for help from a 35-year-old African leader. Through his office window, the lights of Ouagadougou twinkled like scattered diamonds against the vast Sahelian darkness. His aide, Colonel Bamba, stood silently in the doorway, reading the intensity in his captain's expression. The irony was almost overwhelming. The same nation that had imposed sanctions and threatened interventions was now seeking salvation from Burkina Faso. Traoré's military training had taught him to remain composed, but this moment defied all conventional understanding of global power dynamics. The traditional Kent cloth draped over his chair caught the lamplight as Traoré rose to pace the room. His boots clicked softly against the polished concrete floor, each step measured and deliberate like his approach to every critical decision. The walls bore portraits of Thomas Sankara and other African revolutionaries who had fought against Western domination for decades. "Mon Capitaine," Colonel Bamba ventured cautiously. "The Americans have never shown such vulnerability before." Traoré paused at the window, watching a security patrol move through the compound's gardens, where baobab trees stood like ancient sentinels. The night breeze carried the scent of millet fields and the distant sound of traditional drums from a neighborhood celebration. His mind raced through the implications. This was not just a diplomatic opportunity, but a historic reversal of centuries-old power structures. The young leader who had survived multiple coup attempts and foreign interference now held cards that could reshape global dynamics. Traoré thought of his grandmother's stories about colonial exploitation, of promises broken by Western powers for generations. "They take our gold, our uranium, our young people, he whispered to himself, remembering her weathered hands as she spoke. Yet here was Trump, the embodiment of American power, reduced to asking for help from the very continent he had once dismissed. The weight of ancestral struggles seemed to fill the room, demanding justice, but also wisdom. Colonel Bamba approached quietly, placing a steaming cup of local tea on the desk, bissap mixed with ginger, a reminder of home and tradition. "What will you tell him, Captain?" the aide asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Traoré turned from the window, his eyes reflecting both the burden and opportunity of this unprecedented moment. The decision he made would not just affect Burkina Faso, but could alter the relationship between Africa and the West forever. "I will consult with the elders," he said finally, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who understood that history was watching. "But first, I need to understand exactly what kind of help America truly needs and what they're willing to give in return." Lonely in the shadows of American power, a crisis festered that no military could defeat and no economic sanction could resolve. Trump paced his private study, surrounded by classified briefings that painted a picture of internal collapse invisible to the public eye. Foreign hackers had infiltrated critical infrastructure, but the real threat came from within, a coordinated campaign of disinformation that had turned American communities against each other with surgical precision. Corporate elites were quietly moving assets overseas while small towns descended into economic desperation and social fragmentation. The same democratic institutions that had made America powerful were being weaponized by enemies who understood that division was more effective than any bomb. What terrified Trump most was that traditional American solutions, military intervention, economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, were useless against an enemy that lived in the hearts and minds of citizens. The intelligence report spread across his desk told a story that would shatter American confidence if revealed publicly. Russian and Chinese operatives had spent decades studying African resistance movements, learning how oppressed peoples had successfully fought back against overwhelming odds. Now those same tactics, community organizing, cultural resilience, grassroots mobilization, were being used to tear America apart from within. "They're using our own freedoms against us," Trump had told his closest advisors. But none could offer solutions that wouldn't destroy the very democracy they sought to protect. The irony was bitter. America needed to learn from the African nations it had once colonized, exploited, and dismissed. Trump's pride warred with pragmatic desperation as he realized that salvation might come from the continent he had least understood. African leaders like Traoré had faced similar coordinated attacks, foreign interference, economic manipulation, social division. Yet somehow they had emerged stronger and more unified. Burkina Faso had survived French colonial exploitation, multiple coups, and international pressure, developing a resilience that American society was rapidly losing. Trump's advisors had quietly studied how Traoré had united diverse ethnic groups, rebuilt trust in institutions, and created economic independence despite overwhelming external pressure. The young African leader had accomplished what seemed impossible, turning weakness into strength, isolation into self-reliance, and foreign hostility into national unity. "He's done in 5 years what we're failing to do in 50, one CIA analyst had reported, though such admissions remained classified. The final straw had come when American intelligence discovered that several African nations, led by Burkina Faso, had developed sophisticated counterintelligence networks that had successfully identified and neutralized foreign manipulation campaigns. While American social media platforms spread hatred and division, African communities had created communication systems that strengthened rather than weakened social bonds. Trump realized with growing horror that Africa had become what America once was, a beacon of hope, resilience, and authentic democracy. The continent that America had written off as **third countries had quietly developed solutions to the very problems that were destroying American society from within. The soft rustle of traditional robes filled the ancient meeting hall of the presidential compound as Burkina Faso's most respected elders gathered in the pre-dawn darkness. Traoré had summoned them using the old ways, not through modern communication, but through trusted messengers who traveled on motorcycles through dusty village paths. The circular room, built from local clay bricks and adorned with traditional mossy symbols, seemed to pulse with ancestral wisdom as weathered faces emerged from the shadows. Elder Mamadou, nearly 90 years old with hands that remembered French colonial rule, took his place at the carved wooden table. "My son," he said to Traoré, "you have called us for something that will echo through 7 generations." The weight of collective memory, of resistance, survival, and hard-won independence settled over the room like morning mist over the Volta River. Elder Fatima, the only woman among the council and respected keeper of oral traditions, leaned forward with eyes that had witnessed decades of Western promises and betrayals. "Tell us, Captain, what makes the powerful eagle come begging to the young lion?" she asked, her voice carrying the musical cadence of the Diola language. Traoré recounted Trump's desperate plea, watching as the elder's expressions shifted from surprise to contemplation to something approaching grim satisfaction. The irony was not lost on these survivors of colonialism. The same America that had supported French exploitation of their uranium and gold was now seeking their guidance. Elder Alsmain, a former teacher who had fought against French educational policies, stroked his white beard thoughtfully. The ancestors whisper that this moment was always coming. He murmured, his words carrying the weight of prophetic understanding.